This is B2B Marketing Methods. I'm your host, Terri Hoffman, and I'm the CEO of Marketing Refresh. Let's face it, embracing digital marketing is daunting. This podcast was created to make it more approachable. Join us as we talk to CEOs, sales leaders, and revenue growth experts who will share lessons learned and tips from their own journeys. Welcome to the B2B Marketing Methods podcast, everyone. Today, I'm very excited about our guest. I'm going to give just maybe a little bit of background and a preview of what we're going to be talking about today, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us. So today we have Russel Treat. Russel is the CEO of EnerACT Energy Services. He is going to talk a little bit more about what EnerACT is, what they do. He's got several entities within that organization too that he can talk about. Russel and I have worked together Russel, I looked this morning and I think it's been like 5 or 6 years now that we've been working together. Time flies
when you're having fun, right?
It sure does, yeah. And we are going to talk today about pipeline operations. We're going to talk about software marketing. We're going to talk about podcasting in the B2B space. We're going to be talking about pipeline safety, leak detection, and several other subjects that are part of Russel's operation and areas of focus for his business growth. So let me start off by saying welcome, Russel. I'm really glad that you could take some time out today and join me on the podcast. Thank you.
Well, so glad to be here. It seems like it's time that you and I did a podcast together. I don't know why it took us so long.
Well, it probably took us so long because we're going to talk about this, but you also host a podcast and I have little to no value to add to your podcast because I am not a pipeline operations expert and would not have any learnings to share with your audience, but I'm really glad that you can join us here today.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah.
Looking forward to this.
Thank you. Thanks for not arguing with me too, that I have nothing to add. We have the same dry sense of humor, so that always makes me happy. So let's talk about how you got started in your career, right? I think you have a pretty interesting story. I had asked you for a bio ahead of time, and one thing that I found really ironic is that you did not include anything about the university that you graduated from, yet it's such a meaningful thing to you in your life. Maybe you could start there and kind of talk about how you started your career.
Yeah, so interesting. So I went to Texas A&M. I was in the corps and in the band at Texas A&M, which for people who don't know, that just means I was kind of deeply entrenched in the culture. I'll put it that way. Got out of A&M. I actually went to A&M not intending to go into the military because you can go to the Corps and not go in the military, but I ended up taking a 3-year full scholarship with the Air Force after I'd been there a year. So I spent 4.5 years in the Air Force as a civil engineer. The first couple of years in Oklahoma City doing facilities engineering, and the second couple of years as a combat engineer in Europe, building things and then blowing it up when I was done, which I had an Army guy tell me while I was in college, oh, you're going to be a civil engineer. You'll find that blowing things up is more fun than building them, which I thought was stupid until I did it. And he was right. It's a lot of fun. Anyway, so I got out of the Air Force after 4.5 years, and I went to work for a cryogenics company. And I was an applications engineer applying liquid CO2, liquid nitrogen, liquid oxygen to various manufacturing processes. And I had told everybody that was close to me at A&M that I was going to start my first business by the time I was 29, and pretty much started my first business because of that declaration, right? Like I wasn't going to be talking trash to my friends and then not do it because I'd never hear the end of it. And I started my first business, which was public speaking, selling books and tapes, teaching goal setting and time management and things of that nature, and very quickly merged that company into a group called software marketing. And that's where I began to kind of find my home. Even throughout that entire period of time, I worked with computers and software. So I started doing programming in the 70s. I'm not a computer programmer. I've done enough of that to know that's not what I needed my career to be, but I've always worked around software. The first civil engineering unit I was in the Air Force automated all of its work orders and job order processes on a Wang mini computer, and that was in 1981 to 83. So, and I was involved with facilitating that project from a rollout and training standpoint.
Okay. So some
So been
of the
around.
things, yeah, some of the things that you're doing today in your business definitely connect back.
Oh yeah, there's no
Yeah.
doubt. There's no
Yeah.
doubt. I mean, the Air Force was brilliant in what it was teaching me, even though I didn't want to be taught, but needed it. It's kind of interesting, particularly around a lot of the leadership and executive communication stuff that you have to learn if you're an officer in the military. So, anyways, I did that for a while. I went to work for software marketing, merged my company in there. I was a principal. And what we did at software marketing is we would look for a device, what we call the device, which meant it's a piece of software that did a job and had been sold, but it wasn't a product because there was no marketing strategy, no roadmap, no development team, no sales organization, no support, no training, no documentation, all the things necessary to turn it into a real product. And we would commercialize those devices. And I did that in a lot of different industries. And what I found was I really liked oil and gas. So in 93, I took a position with a company called B2B Energy Systems, and I ran a software company that was building software for back office oil and gas measurement accounting, which in oil and gas, you have meters as product moves between the various owners, and then that data goes back to a function where they're validating that all the metering is accurate before they
Mm-hmm.
send it off for invoicing. So I
Yeah.
was building software to do that, did that for a number of years, and then in 98 left and started EnerSys. And EnerSys started out as a consultancy, became a control systems integration company. We were building SCADA systems, so that's supervisory control and data acquisition. It's the technology used to put pretty cartoons on a set of computer screens so that you can operate a facility or a pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2007, 2008 timeframe, there were some new regulatory requirements coming out around pipelines that were going to affect control rooms called control room management, and we started looking into that. So in 2012, we pivoted, and this is really kind of always my strategy was to kind of end up with a software company. And through the years of running EnerSys, we made multiple runs at trying to come up with something. And in 2012, I basically had a meeting with the company, said, we're burning the ships. We're going to take this opportunity with control room management. We're going to build a set of tools for that. We're going to become a software company. And that's what we became. And that's how we ended up getting introduced to you, Terri, as we were learning that everything that I had learned about marketing when I was with software marketing 15 years ago wasn't accurate anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I had to go through that same transition in my marketing career. But one of the things that you talked about when you were at software marketing intrigues me because you clearly have the engineering background and experience, and then that transitioned into software engineering eventually. But how did marketing enter into the picture, right? Like how did why what ignited something in you to think I also want to figure out how to commercialize this and learn more about marketing?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. As an engineer, and when I was a young engineer, I was a very stereotypical engineer, very good analytical mind, very good project management, but the communication stuff and the leadership stuff I kind of discounted. And the what I learned when I went out and started my first business is that selling without marketing is hard. And then my one of my partners in software marketing he had taken a software company public and then unwound from that and then started software marketing. So when I merged it, he had a real strong strategic marketing background. And when we would look at devices, we would do a market analysis and try to determine, well, what's the upside opportunity? How big's the market? Are there other markets we could take this technology into? And then what I did is I was the sales guy. So I would go out and make the calls and I'd find all the objections. That's all the reasons that people say no, right?
Okay.
And then we would sit down and we'd work on the product and the messaging and the brand in order to get the messaging on target. And what I learned is when you get the marketing right and you get the sales right, it gets easy. by like a couple of orders of magnitude. So the trick is all about the messaging. It's not what it is, it's how you talk about it.
Yeah. I also want to make an observation in there with what you just said. It seems like you recognized that there is actually a process to how you go about developing your strategy for sales and marketing. And I think that's really important. That's something really important that I want to communicate to our audience of listeners, because I think sometimes people who are from an engineering background that have a very strong process oriented methodology that they're following may not realize that you do actually also have to follow a process when it comes to a more creative and relational field like sales and marketing. A lot of people think like, oh no, you just turn on that glamorous personality and everything comes together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, yeah, that's the difference between professional selling and what people think about when they go to the used car lot, right?
Yeah.
Because professional selling is really about understanding your customer, understanding their problems, and helping them solve problems. That's what professional selling really is. And what marketing is putting together messaging so that people with problems reach out and try to find you.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And there is actually a way to go about figuring out what you just said, you know.
Yeah, well, and
Yeah.
I think one of the things that engineers and scientists and such don't understand, doctors fall in this category as well, is that there is a process, but there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of ambiguity in the process early on because you have to discern. There's like there's a generic process, but the specifics of navigating that process are always quite unique to the product and the market.
Okay, you just said something pretty valuable there. So talk to me about that. Like, can you think of a time that you went through that, whether it's from your current business or from something previous, where you're like, we think we have this figured out, and then you realize we don't, and then how do you handle that? Like, what do you do at that point?
Yeah, I've got many stories about that.
Okay.
I've started 9 companies and I've probably tried to commercialize over 30 products. And there has been more than one case where I had a really good solution, but I couldn't successfully commercialize it. Either because I couldn't figure out the market, the messaging, or we couldn't get the pricing right, or competitive pressures from others. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why it doesn't work. The what you have to do. I have a saying, and I think it applies to this: is when do you call it a failure?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is when you quit, because there's always an answer. It's just how long are you going to have to work at it, and how hard are you going to have to work at it, and how much money and resource you're going to have to invest to figure the answer out.
Yeah.
But there's always an answer.
So do you
You
feel
know,
like you have a rule of thumb that you follow when it comes to that topic?
I probably should have, but I don't.
No, I mean, to be honest, that was the answer I was expecting, because I feel like every situation is probably different and you have different factors at
Yeah.
play, right?
Well, it's a
Yeah.
unique combination of kind of conservative analytical thinking and optimistic entrepreneurial thinking. And those two things are quite different, and it freaks people out. I've had to learn that with my team, I have to tell them, all right, you're talking to the financial Russel Treat right now, or you're talking to the engineering project manager Russel Treat right now, or you're talking to the sales entrepreneur Russel Treat right now,
Yeah.
right? So, and because they're different. Those minds are different minds. They chew on a problem differently.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think one of the things you have to learn is I've got to shift between those different ways of thinking, and I got to be competent in all of them. And how do you know when it's time to quit? Your gut will tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so let's come back to 2012, when you made pretty
Oh yeah,
significant shift in and when I introduced you at the beginning, I talked about the brand EnerACT. So maybe
yeah,
before we go into the shift at EnerSys, you can explain the connection between those two brands.
yeah. So
Yeah.
in so I started EnerSys in 1998, And in 2000, I started another company called Gas Certification Institute. So I had an opportunity to buy a natural gas training facility that was built originally by United Gas Pipeline, which the facilities are still around, but they've been owned by multiple other people. And I bought the facility and we started doing measurement training. And I, because of what I had done with BMP and what we'd done in measurement there, I had a lot of connections and we built up a training company. And then it existed. I had a partner in that business and then I bought the partner out. So it existed kind of separately. And then later I'm like, well, there's opportunities for me to buy some other things and kind of merge them in. So I created a holding company called EnerACT, and EnerACT owns Intersys. It owns GCI. It did own a company called PI Confluence, which we acquired in 2020. And then in January of 2024, we rolled into Intersys. So it's just it's a vehicle for me to be able to continue to feed my entrepreneurial spirit. I tell people I'm the guy that likes to put in the yard. I'm not the guy that likes to mow the grass. What I've learned is for me to be successful, I have to find people that like to mow the grass, but don't go to those people and try to put in a new yard. They don't like that. So
Yeah.
by creating EnerACT, it gave me a way to have companies that could operate and focus and yet still allow me to noodle on, entrepreneurial ideas that I think are accretive to the overall vision.
Oh yeah, and we're going to get to another one here soon once we make it into the 2020s, but back in 2012 and you decided to make the shift in your business model with Enersys, right? Do I have that correct? You kind of made a shift. Okay. So talk about the shift, talk about because I view you as an early adopter. So I view you as a person who is in a traditional industry who is very willing to be on the front end of a trend and adopt something and kind of go after that earlier than maybe the rest of the market sees it.
I think that's an accurate assessment. Yeah. Yeah. And I get bored. Once it's no longer new and interesting, I get bored with it. Right.
Well, so talk about what your strategy was at Enersys and the shift that you made.
Well, so when I started Intersys, it was just me in my second bedroom, and I didn't know if I was going to do consulting or find a job. And I just started dialing and very quickly got busy and more work started coming in. The next thing I know, I'm hiring some contractors and I'm running some crews to do some things. And, and that started leading into doing some projects. And so just out of the natural result of me calling and talking to people and playing with new technology and helping customers out, we grew pretty quickly. And the thing about the systems integration business, it's a very easy business to start. It's a difficult business to grow, and it's nearly impossible to sustain. And the reason it's nearly impossible to sustain is it's project work. So when the world turns against you, as it does in oil and gas, you have to be kind of merciless about cutting people loose. So what I learned about that business is I was pretty good at it, but I didn't like it. And I really liked the software business. And I brought somebody in who's a close friend of mine who I've known for years, who's also a business consultant, and kind of went through a soul searching process in 2011. And the net result of that is I don't want to be a services company. I want to be a software company. So what's necessary to be a software company? Let's go do that.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's what I did. And it was painful. And at that time we had almost 30 employees. And I did a big 2-day event. And at the end of the second day, after we'd kind of gone through this process, I was teeing up this big change. I said, look, we're going to become a software company. And what I mean by that is we're going to burn the ships. We're going to quit doing services projects. We're not going to hurt any of our customers. We're going to do it systematically. But 5 years from now, we're not going to be doing services that are unrelated to software that we provide.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, oh, that's a great idea. They all nodded their nut. And I told them, I said, now, probably 2/3 of you aren't going to be here in 5 years. Not because we're going to run you off, but you're just going to decide it's not what you want to do and you're going to do something else. Mm-hmm. And there were a couple of people who I had to help make that decision. But for the most part, it just kind of happened organically. But it was a very excruciating transition.
Right.
But
yeah,
it was the right decision because I'm now, 10 years, 12 years later, looking back, and I'm saying, I'm doing exactly what I've always wanted to do my entire life.
That's awesome. So, Russell, just if you could you just give a brief overview? Like, what is your talk about the Poem software tool? So, I guess just for the listeners,
Well,
Poem,
let me talk with kind of the overall vision, and then I'll talk about the tools just to
yeah,
lay out that
perfect.
context.
Okay.
So the vision is really not any different than when we were a services company, because the vision was to help people with improve operational performance and improve regulatory compliance. And that fundamentally is our mission: operation effectiveness and safety, right? And operations effectiveness, safety, compliance. That's the mission. We're providing tools and resources to help customers do that better. And that's what we were doing when I was a consultant. It's what I was doing when we were a services company. It's what we do as a software business. The only real difference is it's now a software offering. Software offering is called POEMS. That stands for Pipeline Operations Excellence Management System. That came out of a evening of consuming cocktails with my VP of sales. And I liked it. I liked the acronym because I figured we could do all our marketing in limericks. Now, we haven't made that transition yet, but
Oh my. Yeah.
yeah, there once was a pipeliner from the Permian. Something like that. I don't know. Anyways, I'm being a little flippant, obviously. But what POEMS is a set of tools for control room management, so operations and compliance in the control room. Field operations have a tool called Muddy Boots that's cloud-based and works off of laptops and tablets and phones. It allows you to do all your field activity and schedule at work and maintain your rotating equipment, all that stuff. And then we have another set of tools called Program Suite, which allows you to manage your regulatory programs, your policies, your procedures, track and implement processes, and make sure that as you complete processes, you get all the right records captured and have them where you need them for compliance and for safety performance analysis.
Okay.
So that's what the tools do. But what's interesting, I think, about that is it's all the same vision. It's all the same strategy, but now the mechanism versus providing services or providing software with services. And, the idea is we want software that customers can use with our help once they're fully equipped and trained. And we have customers that do that.
So something that I think is important to appreciate too is that based on your timing, making that shift, it was done at a time where maybe your market of buyers weren't exactly ready to be making that shift from a consulting solution to a software as a service solution. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So you work in an industry that if their job is done incorrectly, people could die, right? Like there's lives.
Oh,
yeah. And all sorts of different types of safety ramifications, a lot of regulatory compliance that is like dictated by the federal government, local governments, and it's really serious what you do, right? So the risk of switching from a way that's known to switching from a way to a way that is unknown was a pretty daunting challenge for you to go through. I would love for you to talk about that because
it's interesting. I never thought about it that way. I actually thought about it's a better way to do what we're trying to do. The problem with services delivery is that you're highly reliant on people, their intellect, their loyalty, their integrity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in a services business that's project centric, you get those people on staff and then things turn against you and then you got to let them go and you get a reputation of doing that. It's hard to hire them, right?
Right.
So you actually have more risk as a services company than you do as a software company. The beauty of software, I say this all the time, software doesn't solve problems. Process solves problems. Software facilitates process. So what I can do is I can normalize processes, and by doing that, I can normalize performance, and then I can do analytics and determine, is the software and the process implemented getting me to the result I want? And I can make changes, and those changes are easier to implement. I get there quicker, and I get a more predictable, recurring result because of software. So to my mind, there wasn't really any risk. I was moving towards a better state. I wasn't thinking about the risk. But you're right. There was risk there, and there was a lot of risk with we had to be deliberate about how we communicated that shift to our customers.
Right, exactly. That's kind of where I was going with it is how did you then determine, all right, I made the announcement to the staff. I've let them know what we're going to be going through. How do I now start to develop what my message is to the market and starting with my clients? Like how did you step through that process?
Well, the first thing is I didn't even worry about it till we had a product that was mature enough to sell to the customers.
Right.
Right. So it was a declaration I made. And basically what that did is it changed how we were investing in the business. So rather than investing in new people or constantly playing with new tools so that we were the expert in the new tools, we invested in building our tools.
Got it.
And then it
Yep.
was 2013 that I brought in a sales guy. And it was 2015, I believe, when you and I got involved because we were going to market and it was crickets. We weren't getting any traction in the market. And we couldn't figure out why.
Oh gosh. Okay, I guess we've been working together longer than I even put together this morning. So that feels more accurate. I was like, I feel like we've worked together longer than 5 years. Yeah.
Well, we started. I mean, we probably had conversations for 6 months before we actually
Yeah.
engaged because I knew what I was looking for, and there's a lot of marketing agencies out there that are not what I was looking for, and it was hard to find what I was looking for.
Yep.
And then a lot of people will tell you what you want to hear, and I didn't want to just be told. I wanted to know.
Right. Yeah. And hopefully something you've learned about my personalities. I don't just tell people what they want to hear sometimes.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's one of the things I
Yeah.
value about you. Truly, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't need people around me telling me what I want to hear. I need people telling me what I need to hear, and
Right. Yeah.
I need for them to be confident enough, strong enough, and persistent enough to get it through my thick skull. Because everything that I do is because of a decision I have arrived at over many years of experience.
Yeah.
Experience being what you get when you didn't get what you wanted. Wisdom being what you get if you learn the right lesson from the experience.
Yeah. I would like to dig a little bit deeper into that because I think the selection process of finding the right sales and marketing solution for a lot of B2B businesses is excruciating. It's a journey. It's not like, oh, we went out and interviewed someone from a job description and then we found the right agency and all the puzzle pieces came together and it's been a breeze. Like, unfortunately, because I talk to people who are in your shoes all the time, I don't see that happen. Very often it can be like a frustrating journey to get to that right equation, right? So where I'm going with those comments is like, what are the things first of all, please do not make this a marketing refresh commercial. I don't need you to compliment our agency. What I'm looking for is a way to help the audience learn, like, what are the things that you looked for so that you knew you were
Yeah.
finding the right partner.
So, what I would say, this is so true for any entrepreneur that is entering a domain that they're not an expert,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in marketing in particular, I'd done a lot of strategic marketing, but I hadn't done any contemporary tactical marketing. So my skills were dated, and I don't have any formal training in marketing. All my training is, the 50 plus books I've read and a whole lot of experience.
Yeah.
So what I was looking for is I wanted somebody that could come alongside me and help me develop strategy and help me build brand. Because and most marketing agencies, and particularly the people that are aggressively soliciting small businesses, they're all promising you leads. I do not need leads. I know everybody that could buy my software.
Right.
I need brand.
Yeah.
And so I was looking for somebody that could help me build brand and build it in our voice with our ethos.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of coming back to your point earlier about what we do is serious. What we do is deadly serious. And I mean, like, for real, deadly serious. If we work with customers and we get it wrong, then lives and property are materially at risk. And that is a big dang deal to me. I mean, it's just a big deal. So our brand has to be this, but we're also innovators and we're on the leading edge and we're driving change. So our brand has to be this unique and kind of in conflict combination of safety, integrity, thoughtfulness, deliberateness, and innovation.
Right. Yeah.
So, finding the right marketing partner that could help us build that brand and then help us build capability around our marketing was like very much non-trivial. And that's why it took so long, because I kept finding people, well, we can help you build leads. And then I would start talking about brand and strategy, and they didn't get it.
Yeah.
Or I would talk about brand and strategy and they would talk about new website and colors, but they didn't get the execution of strategy. And
Right.
really what I was looking for was somebody that could help us with both.
So talk to me about brand, because brand is such a broad term, right? That's it. And I do think that it can, like, different tangible parts of it can mean something different to different people. So when you talk about brand, can you help to define like what that means to you? You're describing like messaging and value proposition and your
It's
like
bigger than that in
tone.
my
So
view.
tell me what it means to you.
So brand is bigger than just messaging. Brand fundamentally is what people take away every time they engage with your company, whether that's advertising, sales, product delivery, going through white papers on your website. Every time they connect with your company, what they take away is brand. And then brand is what resonates for them. And if you're not, everybody has a brand. Most people don't know what their brand actually is.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
That is definitely true.
So
Mm-hmm.
deliberate creation and curation of a brand is a big deal. There are certain things that are ways that people would have a conversation with a customer that if I catch them doing it, I'm going to jump right in the middle of it. And then likewise, if I catch them doing it, I'm going to go, yes, that's good. Do that. That's excellent.
Yeah.
Because it's every single time you interact. So, whenever we're writing blog content or web content, that stuff, it can't be overly salesish. It has to be serious and grounded in fact. And it's not easy to do. It's a lot of work.
Right. And it also can't be like, you're bringing up a point that I think is really important, is it has to do with your customer service. It has to do with every single thing from the first time someone's exposed to your company to how they do business with you every single day, right? So it's so connected
How
to
you
your
do your
company
invoicing,
culture.
how you make your collection calls, all that is part of your brand.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really important to recognize. I had a guest on the podcast last week, and he and I talked about how, you know, and it wasn't he or I who said this phrase, but there was a person that we both follow on LinkedIn who said a sale is not actually complete until the impact of what you sold is realized. And that's pretty powerful, because I think, to me, that connects back to a brand, right? Like, we're
Mm-hmm.
promising you something we're going to do. We did it, and you actually realize the impact of what we sold you, right? Like, to me,
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah. Definition of a completed sale, right?
yeah,
The product's been delivered. The customer is implemented. They like what they got. They're recommending it to their friends.
right. Yeah.
That's a completed sale, right? And if
Yep.
you're not at recommending to their friends, you're not done yet. But
Right.
again, that goes to brand.
Yeah, it does. It
Mm-hmm.
absolutely does. And I think the the like a struggle, for lack of a better word, the struggle to actually identifying that for your company is really hard. But
Mm-hmm.
it can be done. And I think it's also like a living, breathing definition that you're having to redefine as things in the whole business environment changes. But yeah, go ahead. It looks like you have
Well,
something to say there.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
agreeing with what you're saying. What I was going to add is, and as an entrepreneur
Hmm.
leading an organization, it has to come out of who you are and what you believe to be true and your passions. And then what you have to do is curate that with every hire, every sales opportunity, every contracting engagement, all of that. You have to curate that so that everything that you're doing, and it starts with marketing, but it doesn't end there, right? It starts with marketing.
Exactly. Right. So, Russell, I want to talk about a really huge and for your industry innovative content program that you started that is also known as a podcast. And because you did something really unique in your industry, I'm going to say 5 years ago, you started.
Longer. It's 2017, 7 years ago.
Okay. So,
I know, right?
yeah. But talk about that. So you started a show that has now grown into a network with several different series that are involved, which actually, so since I was working with you when you first started it, you actually had that as your vision from the beginning. And it just, you had to go through some different phases and steps to get there. But talk about the Pipeline Podcast Network and what the genesis was, how you got that started, and kind of how it's evolved today.
Yeah, so we went to market in 2013, 2014 pretty aggressively, and we did all the things that I had always done in the past to crack into a new market. So, letters to executives with executive introductions and, conferences and presenting papers, and like nothing was working. We weren't getting any traction. So I'm like, okay, I started going out, and I'm always an early adopter. So I was listening to podcasts starting back in like probably 2013. So I started finding some podcasts on marketing and web-based selling and such. And what I got was, well, if you're going to do current marketing, you have to give something away, because marketing is now pull marketing. It's not push marketing. And everything I had learned was push. That's the old school way of doing things. And the world had shifted to pull marketing. And I'm like, what in the world could I give away? I mean, for an entrepreneur, I'm like, I don't give things away. It's not what I do.
Well, especially when you're a consultant, right? Like,
right.
What you know is what you sell.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's exactly. It's right on point. I started noodling on the idea, and I started thinking about podcasts. Could I do a podcast? Now, I have a background. I've done music off and on for years. I've run sound for bands. I was a DJ at the college radio station for a while. So I have a background of being on the microphone. Mm-hmm. So, and I knew I had the voice for it, and I kind of had some of the native skills, because I've done a ton of public speaking, and it generally comes easy to me. So it's just kind of the natural gifting that God gave me. So, but knowing that I might want to do a podcast and that might be something I could give away was part of it. But then I started thinking, well, how am I going to do this? Because I'm already working 80 hours a week and I don't want to work 85. So How do I do this? Right. So what's necessary? What's the logistics? How am I going to do it so that all I have to do is get on the microphone and talk? And then if I'm going to do a podcast, what should the theme be? And you started pushing me. Yes, Russell, you need to do a podcast. Yes, Russell, you need to do a podcast. And I would ask you these questions. We had this conversation multiple times. And I finally hit on it when I realized that I learned measurement by going to the measurement schools, going to the classes, and then after the classes, carving the instructors out. And if they couldn't ask the question, going back on the trade show, finding the smart guy and asking the question. And I became an expert in measurement by doing that, right? Yeah. And so, the most valuable thing I have is my Rolodex. I know if anybody knows what a Rolodex anymore, my contact list, right?
Yeah.
Who I know to call when I have, this problem, I call this guy, they're going to be able to help me, right?
Right.
So I'm like, well, maybe that's what the podcast ought to be. Maybe what I do. And at that time, one of the things that kind of became clear for me is I was very well known within a certain segment, but that segment was relatively small and not appropriate for where we were trying to go in the future. And I realized there was a whole lot I needed to learn about pipelining. I'm like, well, why don't I just interview people and record it, and then I'll learn about pipelining. And if I do this right, I'll create a resource that's an asset to industry. So that's kind of the genesis. And then I'm like, well, if I become an asset and a resource, then I'm going to get more resonance around our brand and our products.
Right. Yeah. So I remember, well, first of all, I remember when you had that light bulb moment on the theme, because I
Hmm.
remember getting a really fired up, excited call from you, because it's like it all came together and you arrived. I had been pushing you, pushing you, pushing you
And
because
I had been thinking about it for
yeah,
about 18 months. I've been thinking
yeah.
about it for a long time.
I remember that was, that was a gratifying moment for me as well as you, because it was just exciting to hear that you figured out something that you could spend your time doing that would add value not just to your business but to the whole industry. That's pretty
Hmm.
cool. And then secondly, I remember you telling me something about a year after the podcast launched, because you were having, like you just described, you were really well known in a specific group and in a certain niche of the market, but you were having trouble building awareness with multiple kind of stakeholders within your client account, right? There's different groups involved in operating a control room, not just the person sitting at the controller station. I remember you telling me about a year after the podcast launched, oh my gosh, a year ago, people would come up to the EnerSys booth at a conference and say, oh, EnerSys, who are you? What do you guys do? And I
Hmm.
remember a year after the podcast launched, people were approaching your conference booth and saying, "Oh, yeah, you're the guy that hosts the Pipeliners podcast. I know you. This is really cool. I've got some questions about the poems tool for you." And so it skipped them ahead into a different phase of a conversation because they had already spent a lot of time getting to know you through the
Yeah.
podcast, right?
Yeah. So now we're 7 years in, and we're going to go to our big conferences here in a few weeks, and I will have multiple people come up to me. Well, I'll give you a couple of examples of like work. So the whole goal was to become known as a resource and a trusted partner and an expert in the pipeline world.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I knew pretty much, people that worked around building SCADA systems, and that was it. So here we are 7 years later. I've known personally the last two administrators of PHMSA, which is the federal regulator for pipelines. I know all of the people that are in leadership positions around the various trade organizations that support pipelining. I've met multiple company presidents, vice presidents. I've met tons of consultants and people that work in pipeline safety and integrity management and such. So, in fact, in December, I went to an event in Washington, D.C., and I was riding in the elevator from the event up to my room. And I just said to the guy in the elevator, could you push floor whatever? And he kind of cocked his head and he goes, you're the Pipeline Podcast guy, right?
No way.
Yeah, yeah. He goes, oh, yeah, I know you. And then I handed him a card and he dropped me a note. It was a senior pipeline regulator for one of the, at the state level for one of the states in the U.S. And he reached out and says, I want to get together with you and visit. So everything that we set out to accomplish, we've accomplished and then some with the
Right.
podcast.
Right.
And I know that there are companies out there that use content we've created to onboard new engineers and new technicians and operators. It's really, and I hear from regulators and senior managers all the time saying, listen, all the time, I'm always learning something new.
That's awesome.
And it's an extension of the brand. So it's driven by my natural curiosity and the guests' expertise. And then occasionally I'll bring somebody on to interview me about something I'm an expert in.
Yeah, but I think what's interesting about it to me, just having known the entire journey you've been through, is that you don't talk about your companies on the
Not much.
podcast. Yeah. So you're actually just generating content that is helpful to the entire industry. And that has always, like, I've watched you stay very true and like maintain a very high level of integrity to that goal and not make it a self-serving show, right? Where you're talking about
Mm-hmm.
trying to sell something. And I think in my mind, that's like one of the ingredients that has made it so successful.
Yeah, there's one thing too that's going on that's interesting is when I started, I was the first podcast in the pipeline space, and I started pre-COVID.
Mm-hmm.
There are now several other podcasts in this space, and they're all people that were on my podcast first.
Hmm.
And with some of them, one of the groups in particular, we have an ongoing riff where, they'll be at a trade show and I'll sit down in their booth and I'll do a Pipeliners podcast promo from their booth, right? And they'll do the same to me. So it's become fun, and it's created a lot of neat relationships.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's cool is you're not even looking at those other shows as a competitor. You're looking at
Mm-mm.
them as helping to further increase the method of learning through a
Right.
podcast. Yeah.
It's all part
Yeah.
of executing the vision.
Yeah. So let me come back to another component of content production and talking about EnerSys. So I think something that is extremely challenging when it comes to producing content, if it's a white paper, a blog, a case study, a video, when you're doing that for a highly technical deliverable, I would love for you to talk about some of the challenges in that and how you have found some success at EnerSys in getting from point A of like, we'd like to communicate this to Z on, okay, now we've put something that we feel has some substance. It may not be what I tell someone in person, but it's got some substance to it. And we think this can help us in the marketing realm.
Yeah, the hardest part of that is getting people to speak in the company voice. It still needs to be a marketing piece, right? You still got to put the marketing stuff in it, but you got to speak in the company voice. That's the hardest bit. The technical content is one challenge. I mean, that's just a matter of getting the right people to focus on dropping it on the page. So what tends to happen is the people that are good at kind of general marketing copywriting and can learn your voice don't know the technical content, and the
Right.
technical content people can't really put it into a voice.
Mm-hmm.
So getting those folks to work well together and just kind of say, look, you're not a writer. You have technical content and you can put it down on pages, but you're not a writer. You don't write in a way that people want to sit and read it. They're a writer. They don't know the technical content. So trying to help people understand, particularly engineers and technicians and people that have regulatory compliance backgrounds, getting them to understand that, yes, you write, but you don't write, and they write, they don't know. And getting that teamwork to happen effectively and getting the voice correct. That's the hardest part.
Yep.
Content is just work.
Yeah.
That's still harder than getting any other work done that's not generating revenue.
Do you think that it is hard work that is worth the time that needs to be put in to get to that correct equation?
Wow. Well, I'm not going to quit doing it. So I guess the answer to that's yes.
Right.
Yeah. The reason I hesitate as I'm thinking about answering that question is it's a lot of work, and it's hard to quantify the value of that work. Really hard. On the other hand, what I know is if you don't have that content, you're not going to get traction like you need to. And again, if we're going to deliver the brand, we have to deliver thought leadership content. We've got to be constantly pushing the envelope. We've got to be the place that people go to our website, look for our white papers because they know they're going to learn something.
Yeah. Well, and I'm really digging into this topic and I'm asking you hard questions about it because I just see so frequently, and again, this is not a boy, I want everybody to call me and work with Marketing Refresh. What I want is for people to not let them that be the thing that scares them or stops them from starting on the marketing journey, because content production for a B2B brand that has a complex offering is key, right? It
Oh,
is
yeah.
really important. It is
Yeah.
hard to quantify. And I think finding that balance between the technical information and more of like a go to market writing style is
Mm-hmm.
extremely challenging. And I see it hold people back too often. And I feel like they miss out then on that opportunity to better connect with their audience.
Well, and I think the thing that I've learned from working with you, Terry, and the whole Marketing Refresh team is that you really have to make a commitment to the totality of what you're going to do.
Yep.
Whatever that totality is, you have to make a commitment to it. I think, and we were talking about the podcast. I think you'll probably recall this, but you'll remember I said we're going to do this for a year, and then we're going to reevaluate.
Yep. I
And
definitely
when I
remember that.
started out, I
Yeah.
sent out 200 emails to people that I know. I said, listen to this. Let me know what you think. And by the way, I want you to be a guest. And about 25 episodes in, I was really struggling to find guests.
Hmm.
And at 50 episodes, I wasn't getting the results I wanted yet. But the indication was that we were headed on the right track. And at the end of 2 years, it's like, oh man, yeah, no, this is working. And now it's like, I can't quit.
Yeah.
It's become too much fun. And I just keep meeting more and more people and learning more and more. And, it's just, it's like I'd be doing a disservice to the industry if I quit. And I don't mean that to be braggadocious or anything. It's just, people really rely on that content to help them do their job.
Well, I think that is totally a reflection of the quality of the guests that you've been able to bring on, right? It's
Hmm.
you've created the platform and certainly ask great questions and you're curious about the right topics, but I mean the guests you have are for anyone that's in your industry, you get the top of the top as far as
Yeah,
like
that's true.
credibility.
That's
Yeah.
very true.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. You're able to convince them to come on your show because they know you've got the platform.
Well,
But
I
it did
think
take you
also,
time. It took
yeah,
time to
well, I
get
think
there.
it's two things. One, they know I have the platform, and two, now that enough of those people have been on, they know that I'm not playing any games, right? I'm here to help. I'm here to serve.
Yep.
I'm going to ask hard questions. I'm looking for interesting conversation, but I'm not trying to set anybody up. I'm not trying to be controversial. It's not what we do.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I've got a really hard question for you. Um,
So the ones you've
yeah,
done before weren't hard.
this
We're
one's
just doing
hard.
the hard ones
This
now.
one could be harder.
Oh
I don't know.
goodness.
You might actually think it's easier. I'm going to ask it anyway. So the question is like looking back on your sales and marketing journey for EnerSys, what do you think has been like the biggest challenge or maybe a couple of the biggest challenges that you've had to overcome? I know what I would say for you, having gone through it with you, but
Well, what would you say for me? I'm,
okay.
I'm curious what that would be, and then I'll give you my answer.
I think the one of the things that has been hard was really understanding like kind of that buying journey that the different people involved in the decision making process each have to go through, and they don't go through it at the same pace and they don't go through it in the same way, and their timing and prioritization of it isn't even the same. So that's something you and I have had conversations about before. It's really challenging.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's certainly truth to that, but the thing about the buyer's journey and what I believe about selling is I don't have any argument that that's what's required. It's just the discovery of that is challenging, but that's not been the most challenging bit.
Okay, well then I can't wait to hear your answer.
The most challenging bit is when you and I started together, I was still carrying most of the sales.
Oh, yeah.
I don't carry hardly any of the sales anymore. So that's making that transition. And for any entrepreneur who knows they can make it rain, to give that rainmaking to somebody else is hard, right?
Yeah.
Just hard for all kinds of reasons. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is realizing that I know more about selling, particularly selling our products, than anybody else, even if they're my top salesperson. So we have a product called Muddy Boots. I brought
Hmm.
somebody in to kind of drive that. They were with us about 2.5 years, had almost zero success. I took over the sales from them when they left, and that was 7, 8 months ago. And we've gone from zero customers to half a dozen. We got 6 more waiting to sign. But the challenge with that is, and really kind of coming back to this whole buyer's journey, is they didn't understand the journey. They didn't understand how to sell. My challenge is I do it intuitively, and I have to try and raise it to a conscious level so I can teach it to others and hold accountability to the process.
Yeah. Well, and you're bringing up something else that is I think very pervasive in the B2B space is that the blurring of lines between being a really successful salesperson and being a successful marketer are they're blurring even more. Like the differentiation between those roles is even evolving quite a bit, right?
Yeah, I think the state of the art with marketing is that marketing, sales, account management, and service are all coming together and becoming a revenue team. And
Yeah.
that is a much better model. In fact, I just put in an incentive program for the company so that everybody participates in the commission on new sales.
Interesting. Okay.
Because what
Yeah.
I want, and where it gives in where we are in our life cycle and what we need to kind of continue to have the company grow, be successful, and really have sustainability, is we need a larger install base. That is, in terms of like what we need as a KPI, as company performance, we need more customers. Not like we don't have enough. We have quite a few, and we're growing. But in a software business, there's a point kind of crossover, kind of a break-even point where I get this level of customers, and now I have sustainability, and I can weather the downturns effectively.
Yeah.
And it's the downturns where you really capture market share.
But I really wish that somebody who is not in your industry listening to this could like actually appreciate the level of complexity involved with your software tools, because a lot of people, when you use the word SaaS or a software sale, you think of something that is maybe like much more, not really like enterprise level, might not be the first thing people think about. They're thinking more about like a tool I use to do scheduling or putting my calendar and appointments together.
The stuff we're selling is mission critical. People rely on it for safety performance.
Right. And it is highly complex and rich in its feature set. It almost, to me, is as complicated as selling like a $700,000 piece of equipment that has to be installed out in the field, right? It has so many different implications in terms of, it's not just figuring out like which menu do I go to use this particular feature.
You actually have to know the job you're trying to perform.
Yes.
And how the tool supports performing the job. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Correct. Yeah. So it's when you kind of describe that you're selling software, embedded within that is a really important component, which is making sure that it actually connects to the way that they operate.
Yeah. There's subject matter expertise.
Yeah.
That again, it's part of the brand, but we have to help the customers get to the value, which means we got to understand what they're doing, how they're using it, the implications, right? We got to understand how they operate all that.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, Russell, one last area that I wanted to ask you about is also very challenging, but I'm still going to ask it anyway. Since I've just been like throwing I've been throwing the curveballs at you the whole time so far. So why stop now? What the last question I have is really about budgeting, right? So this can be like a really uncomfortable conversation to talk about, but I am really trying to, again, like use this platform to make everything in the digital marketing realm less scary than I think it is to a lot of entrepreneurs right now. So how do you approach budgeting when it comes to like sales and marketing? And how does that connect to like reporting and performance review and things like that? Can you create a system of accountability for this area?
Wow. That's a really interesting question. So I'll tell you where we are in kind of the life of our business, because it'll help build context for the answer to this question. So we have just hit 15 employees. So, when you're running a business and you're less than 15 employees, you can kind of have your hands on every little detail. But you can't you can kind of barely do that at 15, and there's no way you can do it at 25. So there's this process you have to go through where, rather than you as the leader entrepreneur being the process and the control, you have to begin to document all your processes and controls and implement them in a way that people can follow them. And then you have to work on managing the process, not the people. And we're right at the kind of the tipping point of having to really dive into that deeply. And it's very challenging because nobody has time to do it, and everybody needs these things answered yesterday.
Right.
Right. So just kind of building context. So you asked about budgeting and how do you budget for marketing and
even resourcing, kind of just more broadly, like resourcing and budgeting is a part of resourcing, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I do it really well. I'd have to have somebody else that's seen a lot of other companies do it come look at what I do. And we're certainly having a lot of growing pains in this domain. But what I would say is you got to have a budget. You've got to monitor how you're doing versus the budget. Just what am I spending versus what I thought I should be spending, right? Just at that level. And then you have to have some kind of reporting and evaluation to determine, is that spend justified? And probably more to the point is that spend optimized? It's probably more of a better frame. So we are clumsy at that at best, not near where I would want to be. We're, when we first started working with you in Marketing Refresh, we had 0. So now we have more than 0.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't say we're flying the plane based on the KPIs we're seeing. So, it's a big challenge. I know what my vision is. I know where I want to try and get to. And I think the classic model of I spent this much on marketing, I built and I created this many leads is not the model I want to follow. What I want to look at is pipeline build. So pipeline build is we've done a demo, we've written a budgetary, it's in the pipeline. Okay. That's an ad. So that's pipeline build. I want to look at retention, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Right? Because everything else is some other kind of number that allows me to kind of evaluate. But the real thing I care about is, am I building pipeline? Am I converting pipeline? And am I retaining customers? Those are the 3 things I really care about.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think you said a few important things that I want to highlight there, because just I'm not going to measure anything or run any type of reporting, I think is a mistake. And I think it's a mistake a lot of B2B brands make. And you can set up some basic reporting so you at least like take the first step and you start to see like, okay, this is what's happening. This is the impact of what we're doing now. And then I think without that, you can't even be to the point of the journey that you're describing, which is, okay, now how can I improve the way that I'm looking at this to see if it's helping me reach my goals? Right.
Yeah. So current state for us is I look at podcast downloads. I look at a certain set of reports around sales that tells me what's coming into the pipeline, what's coming out of the pipeline. And then I look at a waterfall report. So what the waterfall report is every month I revise my sales forecast through the end of the year based on what's currently in our customer relationship management software. And I have certain algorithms I apply to that to kind of get a notice. And then I know what the quota is, and I'm looking at how are we doing versus quota. And that facilitates a conversation about, do we need to close things? Do we need to build pipeline and such?
How to prioritize your time. Right. Yeah.
Well, how to prioritize the effort, and that's really challenging with the team because, people by their nature, they want to do it all and they want to do it all right now, but that's not realistic, right? It's focused intensity that moves the needle.
Well, I know that you are part of why you're successful is because you're driven to make it perfect, right? But that doesn't happen overnight. And that's a big message that I want to highlight is you have to start. And then once you start to realize like, I want to improve this area. I want to improve this area. We need to do this differently and better. But if you just, kind of for lack of this is maybe a little bit harsh, but you can bury your head in the sand about it, or you can start looking at it and then start realizing like, these are the steps I need to take to begin to improve what I'd like to have happen as the outcome.
Yeah. I think that's a great observation, Terri. And for me, you're right. I am a perfectionist, but I'm also comfortable with a fairly high level of dissonance. And what I have learned is that there's always going to be dissonance between what you want to see happening and what's actually happening. That's just the nature of things. And that, what matters is what is the thing that if we made it better is going to make everything else better. So let's focus on getting that better. And you can't do very much in a year. But with a plan and consistent effort, you can do a huge amount in 3 years.
Yeah. So one other component of resourcing that I think a lot of listeners would relate to. So when we started working together, we were your marketing department. That would probably be, I would say, the most accurate way I would describe the core of the relationship. And a very transparent conversation that you and I had after some time passed and some of the framework was put into place was like, hey, I think you could spend this money differently and get more for the
you budget, basically fired me.
Well, but we
You
still
fired
work
me as a
together.
customer.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
We just work together differently.
We did.
Yeah.
We had a very, very direct conversation, and you actually helped us bring on staff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like everything else, right? As you do that, every time you make a hire, every time you try to build a capability or capacity, you learn something, right? And there's things that we were doing that we're not doing anymore, and there's things we're doing now that we weren't doing before. And it's a constant, well, what are our priorities, and what are the resources, and what are our competencies, and where do we invest?
Right.
So
yeah. And I think that that's, again, another very relatable item for listeners to observe, is that if you start a relationship with a consultant or an agency, that doesn't have to be the beginning, middle, and end, right?
No, in fact, it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be. When you bring in your trusted partners, they should be helping you build capacity, competency.
Yep.
And, that's just part of it.
So I've got some rapid fire, way more fun questions that have nothing to do with marketing to ask you to wrap it up. But do you have, so let me dive into those. These will be fun.
Okay.
First question. What is your favorite trip that you've ever taken?
Oh, wow. I've done a lot of travel, and I've been a lot of places, but I think probably one of my favorites was the 10-year anniversary trip I took with my wife when I took her to Italy.
Okay. Where did you go?
We started in Milan. We went from Milan to Venice, and we stayed right on the Grand Canal in a room that was like right out of a movie set. We went from there to a villa in Tuscany, kind of a bed and breakfast. And we went from there to Florence, and that's where we finished up. And she's still on me because I didn't take her to Rome. So we got to go back.
Sounds like 20th is, or whatever next milestone is coming
25th,
up. Have
maybe.
to be. Okay,
we missed the 20th. On the 20th, she got the big rock that she didn't get when we got engaged.
Ah, okay. Got it. So next question. This one will be fun because you love music. If there was like a musical artist or group, dead or alive, that you wish you had seen in concert that you could see, who would that be?
Oh, that's a long list, man. If you framed it a little differently and you ask if there was a musician you could have played with,
okay,
who would it be? That would have been Johnny Bush.
Educate me about Johnny Bush.
I'd have been the pedal steel guitar player in Johnny Bush's band.
Johnny
Bush was Johnny Bush, kind of Western swing. He was popular in the 50s and 60s. He used to play a lot around College Station when I was in school there, and I would go to the dance halls and dance holes in my boots, man, just dancing to his music. And in fact, the bump music for Pipeliner's podcast is Pipeliner's Blues off of Johnny Bush's Green Snakes on the Ceilings.
Okay. Now I know who that is. Now that you say that, I didn't know that was the artist.
Drinking and cheating songs, man. That's my kind of country music. Steel guitar, drinking and cheating, and crying in your beer. That's my
You're the
kind
Texas
of country
boy.
music.
Yep. Next question is what is a book that you've read that you constantly find yourself recommending to someone?
Think and Grow Rich.
Okay.
Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. Yeah, that's interesting because there's a lot of books I've read and recommend. I'm a pretty voracious reader, but Think and Grow Rich is the one that I've probably recommended to the most people. And I quit giving away my copy to people and can I borrow it? Because it never comes back. So I nowadays I order them a copy on Amazon. I have it sent to them, and I keep my copy with all its markups and chicken scratching in the margin. That's awesome. Kind of another interesting conversation. I was reading a book, and I had a pen out, and I'm marking in the book, and my wife goes, "You can't write in your book." I'm like, "Why not? It's my book."
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you couldn't be an audiobook person then. You have to, or a Kindle.
I have to have. I got to have a book, actual paper book.
Yeah. So last question is, what is your favorite job that you've ever had?
The one I got right now. Seriously, I mean that seriously. I've spent a lifetime creating this job, and I really like what I do. I like the people I work with. I have a great team. They're loyal. They're intelligent. They're hardworking. They're coachable. I'm the job I got right now. It's the best job I ever had.
Yeah.
And I'm keeping it as long as I can.
I'm very glad to hear that. And I have to second that. You have an awesome team. They're wonderful to work with. And just all the things that you mentioned. So we love that relationship. But well, Russel, I think our time has come to a close. I really appreciate you being on today. Thank you for taking so much time to spend with us. And I mean, the same purpose you have with your audience of pipeliners, I have that same purpose with B2B marketers. And I really appreciate you being open and transparent and kind of sharing some of part of your journey with my listeners. So thank you for being here today.
Hey, thanks for having me. This was fun. And next time, don't ask so many hard questions.
Well, can't promise you that, but we'll see how it goes. Thanks, Russel. Thanks for listening. Please be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast channel and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or visit our website at marketingrefresh.com.